Good morning. It's wonderful to see you, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. We have a slightly cloudy day. We've gotten gale warnings, but the wind seems to have died down since early this morning. And I'm here with you just appreciating you and the time I get to spend with you. Um, we're going about, we, we go to God's Word to see the importance of Yahweh in our lives. And today we're going to see something in this snippet that I haven't really taught you before, but I've even 35 years ago, 30 to 35 years ago, my first paper for my first course at seminary was on Genesis 1. And I started an introduction with what I'm going to share with you today. And that is the importance of our God being the creator of the heavens and the earth, and the implications it has on the believer in how he relates to the non-believer. So we're going to find out that the first thing that God declares about himself in his whole book is that he is the creator of the heavens and the earth. He is telling all humanity, because this is before the Israelites came into being, so this message is to all humanity. The first chapter not only declares that God is the creator of the heavens and the earth, but it is a polemic or an argument, a severe argument against all other gods. We've talked about this before, but I just remind you of a couple of those things because they are, to me, so important. And that is that the gods of antiquity either thought that the heavens and the earth were eternal and that the gods evolved from the heavens and earth, or they believed, some believed, that the heavens and the earth came about through battles between the gods. Our God is above all that. He just speaks a word and it's created. The second thing that I love about chapter 1 of Genesis is that God provides for man food. That's told to us on the sixth day. He tells man, I've provided fruit for you and for the animals. Whereas the gods of antiquity created man for the specific purpose of man providing food for the gods. Some of the gods, the minor gods, rebelled against the job of providing food for the higher gods. So they thought, well, we'll create mankind and they'll feed us. But God is different. You can see that our God is a good God, a loving God who's out to provide for us what we need. The heathen, the pagans, the Gentiles, they do not acknowledge God as such. Well, this is a declaration of humanity, chapter 1, to humanity, chapter 1, verse 1. And the first thing we have to realize is God says, I created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now that means to those people, to both Jew and Gentile, that God has no boundaries and no borders. He's creator of the heavens, There are no boundaries in the heavens. Man makes boundaries here on earth. And what the people of antiquity did was each country had its own god or gods. And those gods did not overstep their boundaries except through a war. To the people of antiquity, any war, any battle was one god against the other to see which god would take over that land. Land had boundaries, and these boundaries were, for the gods. And so there are borders to what the gods ruled over. But our God is the God of heaven and earth. And so when the Israelites would talk about their God, they would talk to the Gentile and say that their God was the God of the heavens and the earth. Let's see how this works out, even in Genesis 14 when we're talking about Abraham. You remember Abraham was called by God, and he was called out of Ur of the Chaldeans, that's Babylon, over the Fertile Crescent to Israel. Now, in his mind, because he didn't know any better at this point, he thought that the God he was following, the God who called him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and called him down to the Promised Land, over to the Promised Land, he also had boundaries. His boundaries were the Promised Land. So to Abraham, Yahweh was the God of the Promised Land. And that was it. But there's a story that tells us when he got Doctrine Class 101, where he learned something new about Yahweh. And that's in Genesis 14. Well, Genesis 14 is about a battle between the kings of the east and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and 3 others. And in this battle, Sodom and Gomorrah and the others lost to the kings of the east. And the peoples were taken away as slaves, including Lot, who had settled in Sodom. You remember that. So Abraham goes after him to free him, to deliver him, to bring him back. And so he goes up north to near Damascus, and he battles against these kings of the east, and he wins back the people. And he brings back Lot, and of course, all that he gained. When that finishes up, 2 kings come to him, the king of Sodom and the king of Jerusalem, or Salem, as it was known then. The king of Salem was Melchizedek, and we've learned about him in Hebrews, haven't we? So you know that story. But I want to emphasize a special part of that story, and that is his doctrinal lesson to Abraham. Now he's going to tell Abraham that it was God, the Most High God, El Elyon, that delivered him and that brought about the winning of his nephew and the winnings of all that he received. So here's what it says in Genesis. Now, I have the heading, Heaven and Earth. And it says this: after Abraham's return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, The king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shavah, that is, the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. Now, that is in the Hebrew, El Elyon. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, El Elyon, creator, possessor of heaven and earth. The word for creator or possessor here can be translated either creator or possessor. He is possessor of heaven and earth because he is the creator of it. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Melchizedek is telling Abraham that the God who brought him out of the Ur of the Chaldeans over into this new promised land was El Elyon, the Most High God, creator, possessor of heaven and earth, and therefore there were no boundaries. There were no borders to the kingdom of God. And he says, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. It was God who delivered the enemies, not Abraham and his 300-odd men, but God. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abraham, give me the persons. You notice that Melchizedek gave. And the king of Sodom says, give me. Abraham said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to Yahweh, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. His doctrine class has just finished, and he's already telling a pagan what he has learned about God. My God is boundaryless. There are no boundaries. There are no borders to my God. He's so excited about learning about that. There's no other God. He's the Most High God. He's El Elyon. No other nation had a God who claimed what our Yahweh claims. That is, to be the God, the possessor, the creator of heaven and earth. Another story where this truth comes out in a situation where there's a pagan. Now, we saw that Abraham came from paganism, and now he's learning about God Most High. Let's see another story. Joshua 2, 8-11. Before the men lay down, now this is about Rahab and the spies. And before the spies lay down, Rahab came to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that Yahweh has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us. What a declaration of faith. But watch what she includes in her faith statement. She says, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how Yahweh dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt 40 years before, and it's still on the gossip column. And what you did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For Yahweh, your God, He is God in the heavens and above and on the earth beneath. She's declaring what was declared in the first chapter of Genesis, what was declared by Melchizedek and by Abraham. The declaration that God is creator, possessor of heaven and the earth, and therefore has no boundaries, has no borders. Jonah. This is interesting. Again, pagans learn. First thing about God they learn is the first thing that's declared in our Bible. Jonah. And the sailors said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us." Do you remember? They're out in the sea. They really want to get back to dry land. They cannot. The sea is monstrous, and the ship is about to be destroyed. They know it, and they want to find out who did this to us. And so they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation, and where do you come from? What is your country, and what people are you?" They are clamoring with questions. You see, here one man asks one question, another asks another question, another asks another question, and all questions come out at the same moment. They are quizzical and fearful. But he answers, watch what he says, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear Yahweh." That's really, it seems as though he doesn't have the right kind of fear of Yahweh. The God of heaven, who made, that's Allah, another word for creation, created the sea and the dry land. What is the earth made up of? Sea and dry land. And so he's saying, the God of heaven and earth. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this that you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of Yahweh, because he had told them. Once they finally concede and throw him into the sea, as Jonah has said to do, and the sea quieted immediately, they went to Yahweh and they prayed and sacrificed to Yahweh. They now believed in the God of Israel, who was creator of the heavens and the earth, who had no boundaries, who had no borders. Daniel and the story of Nebuchadnezzar, again, a pagan who's going to come to realize who the Most High God is. So let me read that from Daniel 4:34 to 37. At the end of remember, Nebuchadnezzar, in his pride, his mind turned to that of an animal due to his pride. And then he lifts up his hand to heaven. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed El Elyon, the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. Notice he lives forever. He's the Most High God. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. It keeps on going. The kingdom keeps on going. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. He does according to his will among the hosts or the stars of heaven. So we get, again, earth and heaven. He's talking about here. Let me read it. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the stars of heaven and among the inhabitants of earth. He's talking earth, not Assyria, not Babylon, not Syria, not a nation, but heaven and earth. And none can stay his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my lords sought me, and I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor, the King of heaven. No boundaries. He's the King of heaven. No borders. He's the King of heaven. For all his works are right and his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. He started out in pride. He was humbled by the God of the universe. A pagan acknowledges that our God, the Most High God, is the God of the heavens and the earth. Jeremiah. Now, this is really interesting. Your books in the Bible, except parts of the book of Daniel and one other verse in Jeremiah, are all in the language of Hebrew, because that was the language of the Jewish people. But all the other lands had a common language, and that was the language Aramaic. This was a cousin language, really, to Hebrew, but it is different. And so God is going to tell Jeremiah what to proclaim to the nations. And he's going to give him one verse in Aramaic to proclaim to the nations. There's only one verse. Wait till you see what it's about. Thus shall you say to the nations, Yahweh says, the gods who did not make the heavens and the earth shall perish from the earth and from under the heavens. Did you see that? Heavens and earth, and then earth and heavens. An inclusio. The gods who did not make the heavens and the earth, they will perish from the earth and from under the heavens. One message. God is creator of the heavens and the earth. He goes on to say this, it is he, Yahweh, who made the earth by his power. Now this is in Hebrew. The first verse in this place, verse 11, is in Aramaic. That's to the nations. But Jeremiah continues. It is he, Yahweh, who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens. Here we've got heavens, earth and heavens again. When he utters his voice, remember what voice is? Kol. And it can be translated thunder. When he utters his thunder, there is a tumult in the waters, in the heavens, in the skies, in the clouds. Those are the waters in the heavens, in the clouds. And he makes the mist rise from the ends of the earth. He makes lightning for the rain, and he brings forth the wind from his storehouses. What do we have here? A storm theophany. It is God who not only created the heavens and the earth and the heavens. It is God who brings the rain that is needed for the earth. It is rain from God, not from Marduk, the Babylonian god, not from Baal, the Canaanite god. It's from Yahweh. The rains come. Yahweh brings the rains, not Baal. And the last one is in the New Testament. You know that Paul goes to both the Jews and the Gentiles, And when he comes into a town, he first goes to the synagogue and talks to them and reasons with them from the scripture. But he also talks to Gentiles. And this is what happens in Athens. Acts 17. Now, while Paul was waiting for Silas and Timothy at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews, which is what he usually did, and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, that's the pagan philosophers, also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, another god," because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. To them, they felt talk of a resurrection was babbling. Nobody believed in a resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, well, the Areopagus was a hill with a stone outcropping in which those who were speaking to the others would get on that stone and teach their philosophy. And so they bring Paul to the Areopagus to be questioned by these pagans. May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting, for you bring some strange things to our ears. Nobody had ever heard of resurrection, rising from the dead. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. Now, all the Athenians and foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." And what's he going to proclaim? What's the first thing he's going to proclaim to these pagans? The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man. God has no boundaries. There are no borders to his kingdom. And that seems to be what is needed today, because people are coming to the wrong conclusion that atheism, there is no God, and no God there to create the heavens and the earth. But our God is a God who did create the heavens and the earth. So let's get to Hebrews. Hebrews 11:29-31. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land. We already did that story, didn't we? But the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. So we did the first verse, verse 29, and we did the verse 31, which is the third verse. Verse 31 says, by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. It's this middle verse, verse 30, that we're going to deal with today. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. I want you to take note of that 7, because as we read the story of the fall of Jericho, the destruction of Jericho, we're going to be looking at the word 7 and circling it. The people of Jericho were Canaanites, and the Canaanites came from Canaan. You know, the youngest son of Ham, who was the son of Noah. And the religion of the Canaanites included many gods. It included particularly El, Asherah, and Baal. Worship included idols, prostitution, human sacrifices. According to Numbers 33, 52 to 53, the Israelites were to drive out the Canaanites and destroy their metal images and demolish all their high places where they gave their children as human sacrifices. The prostitutes, and I want you to think of Rahab, who is continuously called a prostitute in the story. The prostitutes, for their religious services, provided free sex, but the babies of the prostitutes were offered as sacrifices. The ridding of the land of the Canaanites was to protect Yahweh's people from the evil of these things: the prostitution, the infant sacrifices, the idolatry. Yahweh wanted to protect them from all that. But guilt-free sex, because it was a religious rite, guilt-free sex and the additional bonus of pleasing the gods with sacrificing wanted and unwanted babies was a constant temptation. Perhaps more importantly than that, though, the Israelites felt the original gods of Canaan must be superior, because those gods were there first, must be more powerful than Yahweh. Since Baal, the storm god, the god who provided fertility, was there first, and therefore they worshipped him as well as worshiping Yahweh. Even Gideon questioned God's or Yahweh's power to make rain or dew. There were 2 seasons in Israel. When I went to visit Israel 51 years ago, we knew that it would not rain. Don't bring your raincoat, don't bring an umbrella, said our teacher as in the instructions, because it won't be the rainy season. And if it's not the rainy season, it's not going to rain. So there was rain. But Gideon, after he had destroyed, under God's command, the altar to Baal in his town, he was still doubtful of God. And so he asked God for a sign. And the sign was this: can you make dew on my mat, but no dew on the rest of the land? And the next day, can you make dew on the land, but not on my mat? And God showed his superiority to Baal by producing the dew. Dew came on like rain at a specific time in Israel for a specific crop. The dew could lay on the ground in the morning, sometimes 3 inches deep. And so that was a part of the fertility god Baal, who brought dew and rain. But God was able to control that and show his superiority to Baal. And that gave an answer to Baal. He was willing to do what God wanted him to do. we're going to go now to the story in Joshua chapter 6 of the destruction of, Jericho in Canaan. Now, what I want you to do is to circle the word seven or seventh as we go along in the story. And it's going to be multiple times. So be ready with your colored pencil. And then when you're done this lesson, go back to your Bible and circle it in your Bible. Just before we even begin, I want you to know that the main character in every story in the Bible is God. It's always God. He is the one we learn about. Mankind always slips up, makes us a mess of things. But God is the God who is main character in this story too. So his name, I want you to take note, is going to be mentioned over and over and over again. And if you think you could circle two different words, maybe circle the word seven and put a square around the word Yahweh, do so that you can see the multiplicity. Okay. Let's read it. The narrator tells us, now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. So they shut the gates. They shut them solid. They locked it up. Even in the daytime, when normally the people would travel outside city gates to tend their fields. This is not going to happen because they are so afraid of Israel. So no one could go in and out. Then Yahweh speaks. See, I have given Jericho into your hand. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets. Did you see that? That's the beginning of our sevens. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the walls of the city will fall down flat. So Joshua called the priests and spoke to them, and he's going to give them the instructions. Joshua tells them, take up the Ark of the Covenant and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Ark of Yahweh. Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the Ark of Yahweh. So here we get the first instruction. The armed men are going to go before the Ark of Yahweh. Then the narrator speaks up. And just as Joshua had commanded the people, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horn before Yahweh went forward, blowing the trumpets with the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh following them. So now we have the armed men go first, the priests with their trumpets go next, and then the Ark of the Covenant follows. And while the trumpets blew continually. Joshua says, you shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. So it's only going to be the trumpets. No shouting, no cheers. Then you shall shout. So there's to be the silence of voices during the march on the first 6 days. The narrator speaks again. So Joshua caused the ark of Yahweh to circle the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests again took up the ark of Yahweh. And the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of Yahweh walked on, and they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them. So the armed men are first. Then we have the priests and the ark of God after that, held by the priests. And then it says, and the rear guard. So there are going to be guards behind the priests also, behind the Ark of the Covenant. The rear guard was walking after the Ark of Yahweh while the trumpets blew continually. So you're getting this over and over again. So who goes first? The armed men. Then come the priests. And then the Ark of the Covenant carried by the priests. And then there's the armed guard following them. And they do that once a day, every day, for 6 days. But then there's going to be a 7th day. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned into the camp. So they did for 6 days. On the 7th day, they rose early at the dawn of day and marched around the city in the same manner, same way they had done every day, only this time 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua spoke to the people, "Shout! For Yahweh has given you the city, and the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to Yahweh for destruction. Only Rahab, the prostitute, and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to Yahweh. They shall go into the treasury of Yahweh." Of course, this command is going to be avoided by a certain man and his family later on. And the narrator says, "So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, and they captured the city. But to the 2 men who had spied out the land, Joshua spoke, 'Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out from there, the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her.'" The narrator comes back. "So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who had belonged to her. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent out to spy on the land." Now you're probably wondering why all these 7s. And I have an educated hypothesis, which because I don't have a commentary on Joshua, I wrote to my professor friend, Dr. Schnitzer, and told him my hypothesis, my theory of why there are 7s in that story. And he wrote back and said that other scholars had brought up this point also. So I feel like I can share it with you. Why the sevens? We have to go backwards 40 years to the Passover. And before the Passover, Moses had the people circumcised. He speaks of them having to be circumcised if they are going to do the Passover meal. And so he speaks about them then. Then he has the Passover. And after the Passover comes the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is 7 days long. The Passover, by the way, was on the 14th day. Remember the sevens? The sevens? Okay, so circumcision, spoken about, Passover, and Feast of Unleavened Bread, which ends on the 7th day with a big feast. Then we come to the story of crossing the Jordan. And when they cross the Jordan, the first thing they do is circumcise all the people, because they hadn't been circumcised in the wilderness. And they were the second generation. So they cross over, they have a circumcision, and then it's the 14th day of the first month, and they have Passover. Gee, it's following. But there's nothing said about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The only thing said is this thing about sevens. So immediately after the Passover is over, they're given instructions to circle the city. 7 priests with 7 trumpets, and they're to circle the city for 7 days. And on the 7th day, they circle the city 7 times. The 7 priests with the 7 trumpets. That sound is life in a condo. If somebody's fixing their place, we get to hear it. But anyway, that could be a kind of reference to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So now you know why there's all these sevens. What happened to Moses is now happening with Joshua. Just like Moses crossed the Red Sea, Joshua crosses the Jordan, and the seas and the river in Moses' time and the river in Joshua's time get split apart in the same way. They cross over, have circumcision, then Passover, then the sevens. Okay. Well, I hope that was informative and interesting to you. I'd been wondering how I was supposed to interpret all these sevens, and I think it fits in with the theme where what happens to Moses happens to Joshua. Well, goodbye till next time.